The chemistry lab at Westwood Academy was supposed to be a place of learning, the sharp smell of alcohol burners and the quiet bubbling of test tubes filling the air. But that morning, tension cut sharper than any chemical scent. Mrs. Lena Carter, a young black teacher with brilliance in her voice and kindness in her eyes, was writing equations on the board when trouble slithered in. A boy named Bradley, the son of an influential businessman, smirked at the back of the class. He had made Lena's life hell for months, mocking her accent, her skin, her teaching methods. Yet that day, his cruelty escalated. In front of everyone, he stormed forward, fists clenched, and before anyone could react, he grabbed Lena by the throat, slamming her against the lab bench. The students gasped, frozen in terror. Lena's eyes widened as her hands struggled against his grip, her chalk falling and shattering on the tiled floor. Her voice strained as she choked out, "Let go." The classroom erupted into screams, some students rushing to the door, others fumbling for their phones. But Bradley only sneered, his arrogance fueled by the knowledge of his father's wealth. "You think you can tell me what to do?" "You're nothing." He spat, his grip tightening. Lena's vision blurred, but even in her panic, she stood tall inside, refusing to beg. The humiliation cut deeper than the lack of air. She had survived too much in her life to crumble now. Yet the world around her seemed frozen, the injustice burning into the minds of every student who watched. Within minutes, staff rushed in and pulled Bradley away, but the damage was already done. Lena collapsed into a chair, coughing, her dignity shredded in front of her students. The principal tried to hush the chaos, ordering phones down, demanding silence, but it was too late. Videos were already spreading like wildfire online. The image of a young black teacher assaulted in her own classroom by a privileged bully tore through the school community, igniting anger and disbelief. Lena sat in the nurse's office, her throat sore, her spirit shaken. And as she sat there, one thought filled her mind. What will my husband say? Her husband, Marcus Carter, was not just anyone. A self-made millionaire, he had risen from the streets to build an empire of tech companies that rivaled old money dynasties. He was powerful, respected, and feared by many in the business world. But at home he was simply Lena's anchor, the man who held her when she cried, who reminded her of her worth when the world tried to erase it. When Marcus arrived at the school that afternoon, the ground seemed to tremble beneath his footsteps. His sharp suit and cold eyes silenced even the loudest whispers. Students parted like waves, teachers stood frozen. Everyone knew this was not going to end quietly. Marcus entered the principal's office to find Lena seated, her eyes red but unbroken. Bradley sat there too, smirking beside his father, a wealthy tycoon with an arrogant tilt to his chin. "This is all exaggerated," the man scoffed. "Boys will be boys." My son was defending himself. She probably provoked him. Marcus's jaw tightened, his silence more terrifying than 1,000 shouted words. He stepped closer, his presence looming like a storm. "Your boy wrapped his hands around my wife's throat in front of witnesses," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. "And you think this ends with excuses?" The room went cold. Even the principal swallowed hard, unable to speak. Bradley laughed, mistaking Marcus's calm for weakness. "What are you gonna do? Fire her husband?" he sneered. "You don't own this school." Marcus's eyes flicked to Lena, then back to the boy. And in that moment, Bradley realized too late. This was a man who never fought with fists. He fought with power. Marcus leaned in, his voice sharp as glass. "No, Bradley. I won't touch you. The world is already watching. You destroyed your future with your own hands." He pulled out his phone and with a single message to his PR team, the video of Bradley's assault flooded national media outlets. By evening, it was on every news channel, every trending feed. The fallout was instant. Parents demanded Bradley's expulsion. Sponsors pulled funding from his father's businesses, unwilling to be tied to a man who raised such violence. The family name that once opened doors now slammed them shut. Bradley was suspended, his college acceptances revoked, his future shattered under the weight of his arrogance. His father, red-faced with rage, tried to threaten Marcus with lawsuits, but every lawyer refused to represent him. "You're toxic now," they said bluntly. "No one wants their name near yours." Within weeks, his empire crumbled, investors fleeing as fast as they had once flocked. Through it all, Lena remained quiet, her dignity restored not by revenge but by truth. Her students, once hesitant, began writing letters of support. telling her how brave she had been. Some even confessed that seeing her stand tall after such humiliation gave them courage in their own battles. Lena returned to class weeks later, her head high, her voice steady. And though whispers still followed, they were no longer whispers of doubt. They were whispers of respect. She had survived, and she had been defended, not as a victim, but as a woman whose worth could not be silenced. As for Marcus, he stood by her side through every storm. When people asked him why he destroyed a powerful man's empire over a single classroom fight, his answer was simple. Money rebuilds. Futures can be remade. But when you put your hands on my wife, you forfeit everything. His words echoed far beyond that school, becoming a warning whispered in boardrooms and classrooms alike. Power, wealth, privilege, none of it could shield you from the truth once it was exposed. And in the end, Bradley's cruel laughter was silenced, his arrogance ground to dust. Lena's strength and Marcus's love turned the tables so completely that the bully who once thought himself untouchable was now a ghost of his former self. The world had watched him fall, and it was Lena, the teacher he once tried to humiliate, who rose taller than anyone imagined. She had not just survived, she had become a symbol. And Marcus, the husband who refused to let injustice pass, had shown the world that sometimes love is the most dangerous weapon of all. Bradley disappeared from Westwood Academy after his suspension, but the echoes of what he did haunted the school like a ghost in every hallway. Students still whispered about the day he grabbed Mrs. Carter by the throat, some replaying the video in secret, others too ashamed to even mention it. Lena returned to her classroom with quiet dignity, her lessons sharper, her patience deeper, her eyes carrying the strength of someone who had faced cruelty head-on and still stood tall. But she knew it wasn't over. Bullying wasn't a single act, it was a disease that spread through silence, and Bradley was only the most obvious symptom. Meanwhile, Bradley's family crumbled under the pressure of Marcus's unseen hand. Investors had fled, business partners cut ties, and banks withdrew loans. His father, once a powerful tycoon, now faced foreclosure notices and public humiliation, but Bradley himself was consumed by bitterness. Instead of remorse, he seethed with anger, convinced that Lena and Marcus had ruined his life. He sulked in his parents' decaying mansion, plotting ways to strike back. "He thinks he ended me," Bradley spat one night, staring at Marcus's face on the television. "But I'll show him. I'll make them all regret it." His rage blinded him, but destiny had a different plan. Weeks later, Lena received an anonymous email late at night. It contained threats written in jagged capital letters. "You ruined me. Watch your back." Marcus read it in silence, his jaw tightening. He didn't panic. He prepared. By morning, he had his private security increase their patrols around the school and their home. But Lena, shaken, couldn't help but wonder, how far could a boy like Bradley fall? Was this still the arrogance of privilege or the desperation of a drowning man? She whispered to Marcus, "What if he does something terrible?" Marcus placed a hand over hers, his voice like iron. "Then I'll be ready." The day came sooner than expected. During a science fair at the school, students crowded the gymnasium with projects, their parents snapping photos and judges taking notes. Lena was walking between booths when she noticed a familiar shadow near the back. Bradley, dressed in dark clothes, slipped inside through a side door, his face pale, his eyes sunken with obsession. In his hands was not a weapon, but a crude homemade chemical mix, bubbling dangerously in a flask. Gasps filled the room as he shouted, "You all laughed at me!" "Let's see who's laughing now." Chaos erupted as students screamed and scattered. Before panic could turn to tragedy, Marcus appeared. He had come to surprise Lena that afternoon, and fate had placed him exactly where he was needed. Moving with the calm precision of a man who had faced real danger before, Marcus strode toward Bradley. Security rushed forward, but Marcus raised a hand to stop them. "No, he's mine." The room fell silent, fear and awe mingling as the millionaire faced the boy who had tried to destroy his wife. Bradley's hands shook as the chemicals foamed. "Stay back. I'll do it," he screamed. Marcus's voice cut through the noise, low and commanding. "Look at yourself, Bradley. The world saw you as a bully, but now you're just a scared child with nothing left to lose." Something broke in Bradley's face at those words. His bravado cracked, his hands trembling harder until the flask nearly slipped. Marcus stepped closer, His eyes locked on the boy's. "If you throw that, you won't hurt her. You'll end your life. You think the world destroyed your future? No, Bradley, you did. But listen closely. You still have a choice. Right here. Right now. Put it down." The crowd held its breath. For a moment, it seemed Bradley would throw it anyway. But then, as if the weight of his ruin finally crushed him, he collapsed to his knees, sobbing, the flask rolling harmlessly across the floor. Police took him away, his screams echoing in the gym. But Marcus didn't smile at his victory. He turned to Lena, pulling her into his arms as the students erupted in applause. But Lena, with tears streaming down her face, whispered, "He was just a boy, Marcus. Broken, but still a boy." That night, she couldn't sleep. Bradley had been stopped, but the root of the disease, the arrogance of unchecked privilege, the silence of institutions, the cruelty that festered in shadows, remained. She resolved that she would not just teach science anymore. She would teach life. She would turn her classroom into a place where no child would ever feel unseen again. Marcus, too, shifted his path. He donated millions to programs fighting bullying, inequality, and violence in schools, ensuring Lena's story ignited a movement rather than fading into gossip. He spoke at conferences, warning other wealthy parents that privilege without discipline was poison. And together, the Carters became a force, not just a teacher and her husband, but a symbol of love, justice, and hope. Students who once feared speaking up began to come forward, telling their stories of harassment, prejudice, and pain. Lena listened to them all, her gentle voice a balm for wounds too long ignored. As for Bradley, prison became his reality, but it was also his mirror. Away from wealth, away from excuses, he faced himself for the first time. Rumors spread years later that he wrote letters to Lena, begging forgiveness, admitting she was the only one who had ever stood tall against him. Lena never answered those letters, but she prayed for him quietly, not out of pity, but out of hope that even broken souls could change. For though he had tried to destroy her, she refused to let hate define her. In the end, the story of the bully and the black teacher became more than just a headline. It became a legend whispered in schools across the country, a reminder that love defended with courage could topple privilege, arrogance, and cruelty. And though Bradley had grabbed her throat once in violence, Lena's voice had never been louder, never been stronger. She had risen, Marcus had stood beside her, and together they had shown the world some battles are not fought with fists or fire, but with love, justice, and the refusal to ever be silenced. Years passed like whispers of wind through a broken window, and the name Bradley faded from Westwood Academy's walls, but never from Lena's memory. She had gone on to become one of the school's most beloved teachers, her students speaking of her as not just an instructor, but a mentor, a lifeline. Marcus's wealth had grown, but so had his reputation as a man who used power not for ego, but for justice. Together, the Carters had become something larger than themselves, a symbol. But fate, with its sharp edges and cruel timing, wasn't finished weaving their story. For deep within a correctional facility, a thinner, older Bradley sat at a steel desk scribbling furiously into a worn notebook. The bully was gone. In his place sat a man drowning in regret. Inside those gray prison walls, Bradley had been forced to confront the demons that privilege once shielded him from. He had no father to hide behind, no wealth to silence his crimes. For years he was the outcast even among inmates, mocked for once thinking himself untouchable. The beatings hardened him, but the loneliness softened him. Slowly he began writing, letters at first, then full journals, then an entire manuscript he titled The Boy Who Choked the World. It was raw, painful, and brutally honest. In every page he confessed to his arrogance, his violence, his blind hatred, and most of all, the moment when Marcus's words had broken him. "You destroyed your own future." Those words echoed in his mind every night. By the time Bradley was released, thinner, his once arrogant stride replaced by quiet hesitation, the world outside had forgotten him. No business welcomed him, no friends remained, his father's empire reduced to rubble and debt. One cold evening, he found himself standing across the street from the Carters Community Center, a massive building Marcus had funded to provide mentorship, tutoring, and safe spaces for children who felt invisible. Bradley clutched his manuscript in trembling hands, unsure if he had the right to step inside. "She'll never forgive me," he whispered to himself. "But maybe I can stop another boy from becoming me." When Lena first saw him, her body froze as if time had folded back. Bradley, the boy who once nearly crushed her throat, stood in her office doorway with hollow eyes and a notebook clutched like a lifeline. Security reached for him instantly, but Lena raised a hand. Silence fell. Bradley's voice cracked as he spoke. I know I don't deserve to stand here. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I can't live with what I did unless I try to turn it into something better. He placed the manuscript on her desk, his hands shaking. This is my truth. Do with it what you want. And then he turned, ready to leave forever. But Lena's heart, though scarred, was still human. She opened the first page, her eyes scanning his broken handwriting. It was raw, ugly confessions of entitlement, violence, and hatred, but threaded with something unexpected, shame and the desperate hope for redemption. She looked up at him, her throat tightening, not from fear, but from the strange weight of compassion. Sit down, Bradley, she said quietly. We're not finished. It was the first time in years she had spoken his name without bitterness. He sat, his shoulders hunched like a child awaiting punishment. When Marcus arrived and saw Bradley, his instinct was to unleash fury, to protect Lena from the ghost of her trauma. But Lena stopped him with a look. He's not the same boy, she whispered. Marcus studied Bradley for a long time, the silence heavier than chains. Finally, he sat across from him, his voice low. You don't erase what you did with a book. But if you're serious about change, you'll prove it through action, not words. Bradley nodded, tears sliding down his face. For the first time, Marcus didn't see a bully. He saw a broken man who might just be capable of becoming more. In the weeks that followed, Bradley began volunteering quietly at the center, cleaning, repairing, doing the work no one else wanted. The children eyed him warily at first, whispering about the monster in the news. But slowly they saw something different. He was patient, humble, and never raised his voice. Some boys, themselves teetering on the edge of arrogance and cruelty, listened when he spoke. Don't be me, he would say, his voice cracking. You think being feared makes you strong? It makes you empty, and emptiness will eat you alive. The children listened because his pain was real, his scars undeniable. Lena watched quietly, her heart conflicted. Part of her still flinched when she remembered his hands around her throat. But another part of her saw what few believed possible, a transformation born not of money or privilege, but of brokenness. She spoke to Marcus late one night, her voice trembling. If even one child listens to him and changes their path, isn't that worth something? Marcus stared at her, then finally nodded. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. He walks a thin line. The moment he falters, he's gone. Months later, Bradley's manuscript was published with Marcus's reluctant blessing, titled Redemption in the Ashes, to everyone's shock. It became a bestseller, not because it was polished, but because it was painfully real. Schools, prisons, and youth centers began requesting Bradley to speak, and everywhere he went he carried the story of the day he destroyed his own future and the teacher who stood tall against him. He never glorified himself. He humbled himself, turning his shame into a weapon against the disease of bullying. And though Lena never forgot the pain of that day in the lab, she found something she hadn't expected. Peace. Not because Bradley had changed, but because she had refused to let hate consume her. When asked in an interview why she gave him a chance, she simply said, because every child deserves the chance to grow up, even the ones who fail the first time. Her words rippled through the world, becoming a quote etched into classrooms across the country. In the end, Bradley Carter was not remembered as a monster or a millionaire's downfall. He was remembered as a cautionary tale turned living redemption, the boy who once grabbed his teacher's throat but spent the rest of his life lifting others up. And Lena, the black teacher who had endured, and Marcus, the husband who had defended, stood not just as survivors, but as the architects of a future where love and justice had the final word.